The systems cracked. The morning light filtered weakly through the narrow, high windows of the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, casting elongated shadows across the endless rows of filing cabinets. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and old paper, a scent as constant and unyielding as the bureaucratic machinery itself. Millie Harper stood quietly in the center of the filing room, her pastel cardigan a splash of color against the gray monotony. Around her, the cabinets hummed softly, an incessant mechanical drone that was as much a part of the office as the employees who manned it. Millie's heart beat a nervous rhythm as she glanced at the data streaming on the screens around her. The system, the cold and impersonal force that governed the fate assignments, was fighting them. The automated filing mechanisms, designed decades ago to maintain precision and order, were now sputtering under the strain of the misfiled happiness and the human attempts to correct it. The digital gears groaned as Lena Park's fingers danced over the keyboard, trying desperately to coax cooperation from the stubborn machine. Elliot Crane stood beside Lena, his rumpled suit creased from years of neglect, a pipe clenched between his teeth though unlit. His sharp eyes scanned the screen with a blend of frustration and reluctant admiration for the young technician's dogged efforts. "This blasted thing's holding its ground," he muttered, voice low and dry, like it knows it's on the edge of losing control. Lena didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the monitor as lines of code scrolled rapidly, searching for glitches and inconsistencies. The system's protocols were rigid, designed to reject any anomaly, any deviation from the prescribed order. But error, that human imperfection, had crept in like a crack in the concrete, and it was spreading. Millie swallowed hard, the weight of her mistake pressing down on her chest. Yet, beneath the anxiety, a spark of something new glimmered hope. The bureau, with all its cold walls and endless paperwork, was showing signs of vulnerability. The rigid architecture of fate was not as impenetrable as it once seemed. In the corner, janitor Joe swept diligently, his worn-out overalls a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He paused to look up and catch Millie's eye, offering a kind smile that was as genuine as it was unexpected. His recent streak of good fortune had transformed him from an invisible fixture of the office into a quiet symbol of kindness born from error. The gray walls seemed to recede a little in his presence, softened by the warmth radiating from his humble joy. "Joe," Millie called softly, stepping towards him. I think we were beginning to see what this all means." Joe nodded, his eyes twinkling with simple wisdom. "Sometimes the cracks let in the light, kid." The day wore on, and the office gradually filled with a tentative energy. The employees, once resigned to the system's cold dominion, found themselves drawn together by a shared sense of purpose. Millie, emboldened by Joe's quiet encouragement and Elliot's begrudging support, organized an impromptu meeting in the cramped break room. The walls, chipped and faded, seemed less oppressive now, illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights and the flicker of new ideas. "Look," Millie began, voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "We can fight the system all we want, but it's clear that it can't hold us back anymore. The misfiled happiness, the mistakes, they've shown us that there's room for kindness, for unpredictability. Maybe it's time to stop trying to control everything perfectly." Elliot shifted in his seat, his cynical mask cracking just enough to reveal something softer beneath. "You might be right, kid. Maybe it's time we embraced the chaos instead of fearing it." Lena nodded, tapping her pen against the table. "The system's protocols are outdated. They don't account for human error or the unexpected. Maybe it's time to update the rules." The conversation flowed, tentative but growing in confidence. The bureau was no longer just a place of cold order. It was becoming a space where humanity could peek through the cracks. The system's relentless grip was loosening, replaced by a fragile but growing resilience. Outside the break room window, the city moved on, oblivious to the small revolution unfolding within the bureau's walls. But inside, something profound was shifting. The dance between order and chaos was entering a new rhythm, one that acknowledged imperfection as an essential part of life's unpredictable beauty. Millie looked around at her colleagues, feeling a surge of pride and belonging. The mistake she had feared would ruin everything had instead cracked open the door to something better. The system's crack was not a failure, it was a beginning. As the meeting closed, a faint smile tugged at Elliot's lips, and even the grey walls seemed to lean in, listening to the quiet hope blossoming in the hearts of those who dared to embrace the unpredictable. The chapter ended not with certainty, but with possibility. The system's crack was a reminder that even the most rigid structures could be softened by the warmth of human kindness and the unexpected grace of error. And in that space, the Bureau of Accidental Happiness found its true purpose, one not of perfect control, but of imperfect, beautiful life. What would come next was unknown, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt less like a threat and more like a promise. Vivian Marks sat motionless on the edge of her modest apartment couch, the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds and casting long, narrow stripes across the faded carpet. The room was stark, a far cry from the sleek, polished offices she once commanded. A single box sat open on the floor by her feet, filled with remnants of a life that felt increasingly distant: awards, photographs, carefully folded notes of praise. She picked up a small framed photo of herself at a company gala, her smile tight and eyes sharp, the embodiment of control and success. Now the sharpness seemed to dull, replaced by a tentative softness that surprised even her. The dramatic unraveling of her carefully curated world had been swift and merciless. One moment, she was the queen of the corporate castle, decisive, untouchable. The next, a subject of mishaps and misfortune that defied explanation. The irony was not lost on her. She who had always thrived on order and predictability was now adrift in a sea of chaos. But as the days passed in that quiet apartment, a subtle change began to take root. The relentless need to control loosened its grip, replaced by an unfamiliar companion: acceptance. She found herself humming old tunes, lingering over cups of tea, and even smiling at the smallest of surprises. A stray cat that wandered into her courtyard became a daily visitor, a gentle reminder that some things like happiness could be unpredictable and still welcome. Meanwhile, at the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, Millie Harper adjusted her pastel cardigan nervously as she approached Vivian's office one crisp morning. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and the scent of well-worn paper mingled with the faint aroma of coffee. Millie's voice trembled slightly as she knocked and stepped inside. "Ms. Marks," Millie began, eyes wide with a mixture of apology and hope. I wanted to say I'm sorry for the mix-up. It wasn't supposed to happen." Vivian looked up from her desk, her sharp bob framing a face that now held traces of vulnerability alongside its usual sharpness. She studied Millie for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I know," she said softly. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Encouraged, Millie extended an invitation. "Some of us from the Bureau are getting together later. Nothing formal. Just maybe you'd like to come. It might be nice to talk away from all the paperwork and chaos." Vivian hesitated, a flicker of old pride warring with her new openness. Then with a small, genuine smile she accepted. The gathering was a modest affair in one of the break rooms, a space usually sterile and impersonal but transformed by the presence of laughter and shared stories. Elliot Crane, standing in a corner with his ever-present pipe, watched as Vivian laughed softly at a joke Millie told. The cynical crease in his brow softened, and he muttered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." For the first time in a long while, the rigid walls of bureaucracy seemed to melt away, replaced by a fragile but real warmth. Vivian's transformation was not just about personal survival. It was a beacon of hope for everyone tangled in the tangled web of fate and error the Bureau managed. Days turned into weeks, and Vivian's steps grew lighter. She began volunteering at a local community center, finding joy in small acts of kindness rather than corporate victories. The unpredictability that had once terrified her now felt like a dance, awkward at times, but full of possibility. One evening, as dusk painted the city in hues of orange and purple, Vivian stepped out onto the bustling street. Neon signs flickered erratically, their glow casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the wet pavement. She inhaled deeply, the cool air filling her lungs, and smiled quietly to herself. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was hers to embrace. Maybe, she thought, the greatest fortune is learning to let go. And with that, Vivian walked forward, her steps steady, ready to face whatever twists fate might throw her way next. Janitor Joe's footsteps echoed softly against the polished linoleum floors of the Bureau of Accidental Happiness. A quiet rhythm that had become strangely comforting to the office's often frazzled inhabitants. Gone were the days when his presence was barely noticed, a mere shadow flitting through drab corridors and forgotten corners. Now, with an almost surreal streak of fortune blessing his every step, Joe carried an air of gentle confidence that was infectious. In the break room, an unexpected warmth filled the air. The usually sterile space, dominated by humming fluorescent lights and the faint scent of stale coffee, was transformed by the aroma of freshly baked apple pie. Joe stood at the center, his worn overalls dusted with a light coating of flour, a proud smile illuminating his face as he carefully arranged slices on paper plates. The staff gathered around hesitantly at first, drawn by the inviting scent and the simple gesture of kindness. Millie lingered near the doorway, her heart swelling with a mix of nervousness and relief. This was the fruit of her mistake, the misplaced happiness that had unexpectedly blossomed into something tangible and good. Joel Elliott Crane muttered from his usual spot by the window, pipe unlit for once. "I never thought I'd see the day when your baking would bring this place to life." Joe chuckled, brushing a stray crumb from his sleeve. "Sometimes it's the little things, isn't it?" The room hummed with quiet laughter and shared stories. Even Lena Park, usually buried behind a glowing screen and a fortress of code, stepped away to savor a slice, her usual tech world detachment softened by the moment. Outside the break room, the office buzz seemed lighter, the weight of clerical monotony lifted by Joe's unassuming joy. Later, Millie observed from a distance as Joe guided a confused visitor through the labyrinthine halls. His voice was calm and patient, a stark contrast to the bureaucratic chaos surrounding them. The visitor's anxious frown eased into a grateful smile, a small victory in a world often ruled by paperwork and protocol. Millie's chest tightened with quiet pride. Here was a man whose happiness, accidental or not, radiated kindness without effort. Elliot, ever the skeptic, found himself watching these moments with a reluctant admiration. His dry commentary was softer now, the sharp edge dulled by a flicker of empathy. "Maybe there's something to be said for this chaos," he muttered under his breath, the smoke from his pipe curling upwards in a lazy spiral. Back at her desk, Lina hummed a gentle tune as she tweaked the filing system, her fingers dancing over keys with newfound purpose. The hum of machinery blended seamlessly with Joe's laughter echoing down the corridors, a soundtrack to the subtle transformation taking root within the bureau. As the days passed, Joe's quiet joy became a symbol of the kindness that can emerge from the most unlikely of errors. The office, once a bastion of rigid order and precise control, began to breathe with a new rhythm, one that embraced imperfection and celebrated unexpected happiness. Millie, Elliot, Lena, and even the ever-watchful Harold Finch found themselves drawn into this evolving dance, their perspectives shifting in ways they had never anticipated. The question lingered, unspoken but ever-present: could this fragile new balance hold? Could kindness born from mistake truly reshape the cold machinery of fate assigned so mechanically? For now, the answer seemed to lie in the simple pleasure of shared pie, a smile exchanged in a hallway, and the quiet hope that perhaps, in the grand calculus of luck and tragedy, human error was not a flaw but a gift. As Joe wiped his hands on a towel, preparing to return to his rounds, Millie caught his eye and smiled a smile that spoke of thanks. forgiveness, and the promise of new beginnings. The Bureau of Accidental Happiness, after all, was no longer just a place of paperwork and protocols. It was a place where mistakes could bloom into kindness, and where joy was as unpredictable as fate itself. And somewhere deep within the gray walls and endless files, that was enough to keep the wheels turning, for now. The quiet joy in Joe's eyes lingered like a secret melody, promising that sometimes the most profound happiness is found not in control, but in the gentle embrace of life's unexpected turns. With this newfound spirit humming through the office, the stage was set for whatever came next: chaos or calm, laughter or tears. Because in the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, the dance between order and chaos was just beginning, and Joe's quiet joy was the rhythm guiding them forward. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long shadows through the dusty windows, Millie felt a surge of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, the chaos wasn't such a bad thing after all. And with that thought, she turned back to her desk, ready to face whatever misfiled happiness awaited her next. Millie Harper stood by the towering window of the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, her gaze tracing the frenetic life of the city below as rain began to fall, each droplet an unpredictable mark on the glass. A tiny rebellion against the neat order the Bureau strove so hard to impose. The usual clatter of typewriters and the hum of fluorescent lights felt distant, almost muted, as a gentle stillness settled within her. She breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of weeks' anxiety lift, replaced by something unfamiliar yet welcome: acceptance. It was a quiet epiphany born not of triumph, but of surrender, that in the grand machinery of fate, errors were not just inevitable, but perhaps essential. For so long, Millie had been trapped in cycles of self-doubt, her fingers trembling over the files, haunted by the consequences of the misfiled happiness that had upended lives far beyond the office walls. The bureaucratic rituals, once a source of sterile comfort, now felt stifling, reminders of a system too rigid to accommodate the messy, beautiful chaos of human existence. Yet in recent days, watching janitor Joe's humble joy and witnessing Vivian Mark's reluctant transformation, Millie began to glimpse a new truth. Kindness could bloom from error, and unpredictability was not the enemy but a hidden ally. Turning from the window, she moved back to her desk, the worn wood smooth under her palms. The files awaited, countless documents cataloging luck and tragedy, each a thread in the tangled web of human fate. But now, her approach was different. Where once she had double-checked and panicked, now she worked with a steady hand and a quiet smile. Her pastel cardigan, usually a shield against the cold sterility of the office, felt lighter, almost like an emblem of her newfound grace. "You look different," Elliot Crane said from across the room, his voice carrying that familiar dry edge, softened by something almost like warmth. His rumpled suit seemed less disheveled, the smoke from his pipe curling lazily in the stale air. Millie glanced up, returning his wry smile with one of her own, tentative but genuine. "Maybe Ivy stopped fighting it," she replied. "Maybe it's okay to let a little chaos in." Elliot chuckled, a low sound that vibrated with years of cynicism peeling away. "You re-becoming dangerous," he said, mock serious. "Pretty soon you will have me believing in accidents as a form of kindness." Millie laughed, the sound light and freeing. "Don't tempt me." Later, in the break room, the two shared steaming mugs of coffee, the bitter aroma mingling with the faint scent of old paper and linoleum. Their conversation meandered from the absurdity of the Bureau's protocols to the curious ways fate had played out in recent weeks. Millie spoke of Joe's quiet joy, how his good fortune had sparked smiles and hope in unexpected corners, while Elliot shared his grudging admiration for the small acts of kindness born from the chaos. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle. Janitor Joe passed through the corridor, mop in hand, his worn cap tipped respectfully toward Millie. Their eyes met, and in that brief exchange was an unspoken acknowledgement, a bond forged in the shared dance of error and grace. Millie's heart swelled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the office's faulty heating. Here, amid the endless grey stacks of paperwork and the cold rigidity of the system, life continued in all its unpredictable glory. And she, a nervous temp worker turned reluctant architect of fate's quirks, was ready to embrace its imperfections, mistakes, and all. As the day waned, Millie felt a quiet confidence settle within her like a well-worn cardigan, comfortable, familiar, and full of promise. She knew the Bureau's work would never be truly orderly, that chaos would always seep through the cracks. But perhaps that was the point. In the unpredictability and error, there was life, laughter, and even kindness. With a final glance at her neatly organized files, Millie switched off her desk lamp and stepped into the fading light, ready to face whatever surprises tomorrow might bring. The dance between order and chaos was far from over, but now she moved to its rhythm with open eyes and an open heart. The humming of the central filing system was almost hypnotic in the dimmed office, casting a pale blue glow over Millie Harper's determined face. She stood at the core of the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, fingers poised over the keyboard, heart pounding with the weight of responsibility. Around her, the familiar clatter of keyboards and low murmur of voices had quieted to a respectful hush. Lena Park sat beside her, eyes flickering between lines of code and shifting data streams, providing the steady technical support Millie so desperately needed. "Ready?" Lena asked quietly, her voice calm but tinged with anticipation. "As ready as I'll ever be," Millie replied, swallowing her nerves. She pressed the final command, and the filing system responded with a chorus of soft beeps and blinking lights. Slowly, the misplaced happiness files began to realign, their digital paths correcting course. The system was healing itself, but not without a lingering trace of the chaos it had endured. Across the room, Elliot Crane leaned back in his chair, pipe clenched between his teeth. The usual sharp edge of his cynicism had softened after days of witnessing Millie's earnest efforts and the strange, unintended kindness that had blossomed from the bureaucratic blunder. His eyes, once narrowed in skepticism, now held a glimmer of reluctant approval as he watched the monitors display the system's gradual return to order. "Well," he muttered under his breath, "perhaps there's some good in a little chaos after all." Millie caught the remark and smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For years, Elliot had been the embodiment of the Bureau's rigid control and wary disillusionment. If even he could see the value in this mishap, maybe the office could change. Harold Finch, the Bureau's manager, approached with his usual stiff gait, his face a mask of reluctant tolerance. Had spent decades enforcing the strict protocols that now showed their cracks. Today, however, something different flickered behind his stern eyes, a grudging respect for the unpredictable outcomes of human error. "Miss Harper," Harold began, clearing his throat, "the system is restored, but your approach, unconventional." Millie met his gaze steadily. "Sir, the mistake revealed something important. Fate isn't a machine, it's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes kind in ways we can't schedule or control. Maybe the Bureau should reflect that." Harold considered this, the office's cold grey walls softened by the afternoon sun filtering through the dusty blinds. For a moment, the unyielding rigidity of decades seemed to loosen. "Very well," he said finally, but with caution. The office began to hum back to life, but with a new pulse, less mechanical, more human. Janitor Joe moved quietly through the hallways, his worn overalls carrying a newfound lightness. A small flower, picked from a windowsill garden nurtured by the staff in recent weeks, was pressed into his pocket. It was a symbol of the kindness that had unexpectedly grown from the chaos, a reminder that even in a place devoted to strict order, warmth could find a way. Millie watched him pass, feeling a sense of completion and a stirring of hope. She was no longer just the nervous temp worker who had made a mistake. She was a part of something larger, a new chapter for the Bureau, one that embraced imperfection as a catalyst for kindness. Elliot approached, removing the pipe from his mouth and offering a rare, genuine smile. "You did good, kid. Maybe the Bureau isn't doomed after all." "Thanks," Millie replied, her voice steady and confident. Maybe fate just needed a little help from a human touch. As the office settled into this new rhythm, the lines between order and chaos blurred into a dance unpredictable, imperfect, and filled with surprising joy. The Bureau of Accidental Happiness was no longer just a government office. It was a living testament to the beauty that could emerge when mistakes were met with empathy rather than fear. And as Millie sat back at her desk, the blinking cursor on her screen seemed less daunting, more like an invitation. The future was unwritten, and for once, she was ready to embrace it one imperfect, joyful step at a time. But even as order returned, the echoes of chaos lingered, a reminder that fate, like life, was never quite under anyone's control. The question remained, whispered softly in the hum of the filing system. Could the Bureau truly hold the unpredictable kindness born from error? Or would the next misfile be the one to tip the balance again? With a nervous yet hopeful smile, Millie reached for the next file. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. After all, in the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, it was the accidents that mattered most. The morning light filtered in through the wide, dusty windows of the Bureau of Accidental Happiness, casting long, soft shadows over desks cluttered with papers, coffee mugs, and the occasional forgotten trinket. The office was no longer the cold, grey labyrinth it had been during Millie's first tentative days. Instead, it hummed with a quiet warmth, a gentle pulse of life that echoed the subtle changes within its walls and within its people. Millie Harper strode through the rows of desks with a quiet assurance that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Her quirky glasses caught the light, and her pastel cardigan was neat and well-fitted. A slight departure from the nervous bundle of energy who had first stumbled through the bureau's doors. She smiled lightly at the familiar faces, noting the small tokens of change, a postcard pinned up by Lena Park, a colorful mug on Elliot's desk, a cheerful doodle taped to Harold Finch's filing cabinet. "Morning, Millie!" Sammy's voice rang out from the break room doorway, her usual grin infectious. "Looking like you actually know what you're doing now. What's the secret?" Millie chuckled, smoothing down the front of her cardigan. "Let's just say, I've learned to dance with the chaos rather than fight it." In the far corner, Elliot Crane sat behind his desk, a familiar rumpled suit and a faint wisp of pipe smoke curling upwards. He looked up from a cluttered notebook, dry eyes softening as he watched janitor Joe animatedly recount a story to Lena and Vivian. The room, once silent save for the clack of keyboards and rustle of paperwork, now echoed with bursts of laughter and the warm murmur of camaraderie. Joe's worn overalls bore the marks of years of hard work, but his smile was brighter than ever, his steps lighter. No longer just the silent fixture of the building, he had become a beacon of unexpected joy. His streak of good fortune had made him a local hero among the bureau staff and tenants, alike a walking reminder that happiness could bloom in the unlikeliest of places. Vivian Mark sat quietly nearby, her sharp bob now softened by a loosely tied scarf. Her immaculate business attire had given way to something more relaxed. A subtle sign of the personal transformation that had taken root since the misfiled happiness reshaped her life. She held a pen in her hand, poised over a small note of thanks addressed to the Bureau. The note was a testament to her journey, from a tightly controlled executive unraveling amidst misfortune, to a woman embracing humility and the unpredictable dance of fate. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held a gentle warmth that mirrored the changing atmosphere of the office. Harold Finch, the Bureau's steadfast manager, cleared his throat as he entered the conference room. His usual stern expression softened just a fraction as he surveyed the assembled staff. The room was alive with a tentative optimism, a fragile balance between old protocols and new possibilities. "Well," Harold began, adjusting his spectacles and glancing at Millie, "it seems the Bureau has learned a thing or two about the unpredictability of, well, everything." Millie stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "Yes, Harold. We've seen that sometimes the best way to maintain order is to accept a little chaos, to find kindness in mistakes and humor in the unexpected. I propose we create new protocols, playful, flexible, and designed to accommodate the unpredictable nature of fate. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement and raised eyebrows. Elliot exchanged a glance with Lena, who nodded encouragingly. Joe gave a quiet thumbs up from the back. Harold sighed, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Well, I suppose the system could use a little loosening up. As the meeting wound down, Millie's heart swelled with a warm, buoyant hope. The Bureau was no longer a place of cold rigidity, but a living organism, flawed, unpredictable, and beautifully human. Later, as the day waned and the office lights dimmed, Millie found herself alone at her desk, a soft melody humming from her lips. Sammy's earlier words echoed in her mind, and she realized the truth she now held dear: perfection was a myth, control an illusion. But kindness, especially when born from error, was a force that could change lives. The Bureau of Accidental Happiness, with all its quirks and contradictions, had become more than a workplace. It was a testament to the unpredictable dance between order and chaos, fate and chance, error and empathy. And Millie, once a nervous temp worker, was now its confident, hopeful heart. As the night crept in, the faint glow of the city outside the windows seemed to pulse with possibility. Millie closed her eyes briefly, letting the quiet joy wash over her. Tomorrow would bring new assignments, new challenges, and perhaps a few more accidents. But she would face them all with a smile, ready to embrace whatever came her way. Because in the end, life, like the Bureau, was beautifully imperfect, and that was something worth celebrating. And with that thought, the story of Millie Harper, the Bureau, and the curious accidents of happiness and fate came to a close, leaving behind a whimsical, poignant reflection on the unpredictable kindness that can bloom from the most unexpected mistakes. But just as the last page might be imagined turning, somewhere in the dim corridors of the Bureau, a faint shuffle of papers hinted that perhaps the dance of fate and error was far from over.